Emma Hartley was 20 years old when her mother-in-law Margaret told her she was no longer welcome in the family home. It was July 1867 in the Appalachian Mountains of Western Virginia, and Margaret had spent 2 years blaming Emma for her son's death, blaming the young widow for surviving when her husband hadn't. Emma's husband, Thomas Hartley, had died at Gettysburg in July 1863, 4 years earlier. He'd been 22, married to Emma for less than a year when he marched away with the Virginia infantry. She'd been 16 when they married, 17 when she became a widow, had lived with Thomas's parents, Margaret and John Hartley, for the 4 years since his death, working the mountain farm without wages, treated as unpaid labor rather than family. Margaret's grief had curdled into blame over those 4 years. If Emma had gotten pregnant before Thomas left, he might have gotten exemption as father. If Emma had written better letters, he might have deserted and come home. If Emma had been a different kind of wife, somehow, some way, Thomas might still be alive. The logic made no sense, but grief rarely does. John Hartley, Thomas's father, was gentler but too weak to stand against his wife. When Margaret announced in July 1867 that Emma needed to leave, that seeing her face every day was an unbearable reminder of the son who'd never return, John said nothing, just looked away in shame. Margaret gave Emma $10 and 3 days to find somewhere else to live. Emma was 20 years old, had been a widow for 4 years, owned nothing, had no family of her own. Her parents had died from fever when she was 15, which was why she'd married young for security that had evaporated at Gettysburg. Emma took the $10 and made a choice that would define her survival and prove that elevation matters more than people understand when it comes to staying warm. The Appalachian Mountains in 1867 were still recovering from war. Homes destroyed, families broken, resources scarce. Finding conventional housing with $10 was impossible. Boarding would cost $3 to $4 monthly. She'd be broke within 3 months, even if she could find work. But Emma had learned something during her marriage to Thomas that most women weren't taught. Thomas had been a hunter before the war, had built observation platforms in trees for watching game. He taught Emma about these platforms, how to select trees, how to build stable structures 12 to 15 feet above ground, how to lash timber securely. She remembered something else Thomas had mentioned once, something about thermal layering. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. If you're on the ground in winter, you're in the cold layer, but if you're elevated above a heat source, you're in the warm layer. He talked about it in context of hunting. Sitting in an elevated platform meant being warmer than sitting on cold ground. Emma realized she could build an elevated platform in the woods, essentially a treehouse, and use fire on the ground below to create rising column of warm air. The platform would capture that heat. In winter, when ground level was freezing, the elevated platform might actually be warmer than ground-level structures. She found land 3 miles from the Hartley farm, dense forest on a steep mountainside that nobody claimed or wanted, filed a squatter's claim, knowing she could formalize it later if she survived. The location she selected was a cluster of 4 large chestnut trees growing close together, maybe 10 feet apart in a rough square. The trees were old growth, perhaps 80 feet tall with trunks 2 feet in diameter, perfect for supporting an elevated platform. With her $10, she bought basic tools and materials. A hatchet for $3, rope for $2, iron nails for $1, a small cooking pot and blanket for $3, basic food supplies for $1. She began construction in mid-July, working alone with skills Thomas had taught her, but never expecting she'd use for her own survival. The platform design was simple in concept, but brutally demanding in execution. She'd build a rectangular platform 12 feet by 10 feet, 120 square feet of living space, positioned 15 feet above ground, supported by the 4 chestnut trees. The construction process was brutally physical for someone who weighed approximately 100 pounds and stood 5 feet 3 inches tall. Every aspect required solving problems that would challenge experienced builders. The first challenge was cutting suitable poles. She needed approximately 40 poles for the platform floor, each 12 feet long, 6 inches diameter. Chestnut saplings of that size were common in the dense forest, but cutting them was exhausting work. She'd select a suitable sapling, chop with her hatchet at an angle, creating a wedge cut, working around the circumference until the tree fell. Each sapling required perhaps 30 minutes of sustained chopping, her hands blistered within 3 days. Once cut, each pole had to be dragged to the build site. 60-pound poles dragged through dense underbrush uphill. She'd tie rope around one end, loop it over her shoulders, lean forward using her body weight to pull the pole. Progress was measured in yards gained through sustained effort. Each pole took perhaps an hour to cut and drag. 40 poles meant 40 hours of this brutal work spread over 2 weeks. The frame construction required problem-solving that tested her understanding of leverage and rope work. She needed to position 4 main beams between the 4 chestnut trees at exactly 15-foot height, creating a level rectangular frame 12 feet by 10 feet. Getting beams to 15-foot height working alone was the critical challenge. She couldn't lift 60-pound beams over her head, had to use pulleys improvised from rope looped over higher branches. Would tie rope to beam end, throw rope over branch at 20-foot height, pull from ground to raise the beam gradually. Each beam required hours of careful lifting, positioning, tying off, checking level. She built a crude measuring system using a plumb line and marks on a stick to ensure the frame was level. If one beam was 6 inches higher than another, the platform floor would slope. She'd measure repeatedly, adjust beam positions, tie them securely to tree trunks with multiple rope wraps. The frame took 2 weeks of sustained work. By late July, she had 4 main beams creating a rectangular frame supported by the 4 trees. Her hands were calloused and scarred. Her shoulders ached constantly. She'd lost weight from the physical exertion and minimal food, but the frame was solid. Next came the platform floor. 40 cross poles laid perpendicular to the frame beams, spaced 6 inches apart. Each pole had to be lifted to 15-foot height, positioned across the frame, lashed securely with rope. The lashing was critical. If poles came loose, the floor would collapse. She developed a system. Would position pole on ground directly below where it needed to go. Tie rope to center, climb ladder to frame, pull rope hand over hand raising the pole, position it, lash it with multiple rope wraps at each end, move to next pole, repeat 40 times. The work was methodical but exhausting. Each pole required perhaps 30 minutes to position and lash securely. 40 poles meant 20 hours of overhead work, reaching, pulling, tying, that left her arms burning with fatigue. By mid-August, the platform floor was complete, 40 poles creating solid surface with gaps between each pole. She tested it by lying across the poles, shifting her weight, checking for movement. The structure was stable, the rope lashings tight, the frame secure. For walls, she needed only railings to prevent falling, didn't need solid walls that would block the rising heat she intended to capture. Built 3-foot-high railings using smaller saplings lashed vertically every foot around the perimeter. Created safe barrier while allowing air movement. The roof required different technique. She built a simple shed-style frame, higher at one end, sloping down to create drainage. Used more saplings to create rafters. Covered them with overlapping strips of bark she'd peeled from fallen trees. The bark strips shed most rain but weren't perfectly waterproof. Acceptable compromise given her minimal resources. Critically, she left a 2-foot gap on the uphill side where the roof met the platform, intentional opening to allow rising heat to enter the platform space. The heat would rise through the floor gaps, warm the platform, then exit through the roof gap. Continuous airflow carrying heat through her living space. The entire structure, platform, railings, roof, was built from materials she could cut and carry herself. No expensive lumber, no complex carpentry, just saplings, rope, and determination. By mid-August, the elevated platform was complete. a rectangular wooden platform 15 feet above ground, sheltered by a crude bark roof, supported by 4 living chestnut trees. From ground level, it looked like children's play structure, impossibly crude, obviously inadequate as housing. She moved in August 15th. Carried her few possessions up the ladder, a blanket, the cooking pot, her $10 steak completely spent. This elevated platform was now her home. The critical innovation was the heating system. On the ground, directly below the platform, she created a fire circle, cleared a 6-foot diameter area, ringed it with stones. This would be her constant fire location. The fire would burn on ground level, 12 feet below the platform floor. The physics were elegant. Hot air from the fire would rise naturally through convection. The chestnut trees surrounding the platform created partial wind barrier, reduced air movement that would disperse the rising heat. The heat column would rise through the platform floor gaps, warming the platform space. The bark roof would trap some of that heat before it escaped completely upward. The result was a thermal chimney effect, fire at bottom, platform in middle capturing rising heat, heat escaping through roof gap at top. As long as fire burned, warm air flowed continuously upward through the platform space. The town's reaction when people discovered where she was living ranged from shock to mockery. Emma Hartley was living in a tree platform like a bird. A treehouse 15 feet above ground, would freeze to death when winter came, would fall during storms. The whole structure was absurd desperation that proved widows needed proper male guardianship. Sarah Bennett, wife of the town's magistrate and pillar of local society, organized a visit in September. 5 women came to convince Emma to accept proper arrangements before she died from her foolishness. They stood at the base of the 4 chestnut trees, looking up at the platform 15 feet above, shaking their heads at the crude construction. "Mrs. Hartley," Sarah called up, "please come down so we can speak reasonably. You cannot live in a tree. This is not housing. This is dangerous and inappropriate. The Davidson family needs household help. Room, board, and $2 monthly. That's proper work." Emma climbed down the ladder to face them. "The platform is stable. The elevation provides advantages. I'm managing adequately. It's sticks tied to trees. When winter comes, you'll freeze. There's no walls, no chimney, no heating. You'll die up there. Please accept help before it's too late." "The platform has heating. Fire below. Heat rises through the floor. The elevation puts me in the warm air layer above cold ground. It will work. Hot air rises and disappears. It doesn't heat anything. You're confused about basic physics. This is why women need guidance. Please accept proper housing." Emma thanked them for their concern and watched them leave, certain she'd be dead by Christmas. Through September and October, the elevated platform proved remarkably effective, and Emma began understanding thermal advantages that vindicated Thomas's hunting observations, while also discovering profound challenges of elevated living. The platform at 15 feet elevation experienced noticeably different conditions than ground level, differences that became more pronounced as autumn progressed. On cool September mornings, she'd wake on the platform wrapped in her single blanket to 48-degree air temperature. Her breath would be visible, but not the dense fog it would become at ground level. She'd climb down the ladder, 15 feet of careful descent on rope and pole construction she'd built herself, to tend the fire circle below. At ground level, the temperature would be 42 degrees, 6 degrees colder than at platform height. She could feel the cold air settling around her ankles, pooling at ground level like invisible liquid. The cold air had settled during the night due to its greater density. Her platform was above that cold accumulation. The fire maintenance became her constant rhythm. She'd collect deadwood from the forest, perhaps 30 pounds daily, would arrange it in the fire circle, maintaining continuous small fire rather than large intermittent ones. The continuous fire created steady heat column. Large fires would produce too much heat for comfort and waste wood. Small, constant fire was optimal for her thermal chimney system. The fire heating system worked exactly as physics predicted, though the experience was stranger than theory suggested. She'd maintain a fire burning perhaps 4 pieces of wood continuously. The fire would produce heat radiating outward at ground level, but most heat rose vertically through convection. She could stand beside the fire at ground level and feel minimal warmth, but climb to the platform 15 feet above, and the rising heat was noticeably present. The platform space would warm to perhaps 60 degrees on cool autumn days, even though ambient air was 50 degrees. She was essentially living inside the heat column, the rising stream of warm air from the fire below. The sensation was unusual. Her body would be warm, but she could look out horizontally from the platform and see cold air beyond the heated column. The heating efficiency was remarkable because she wasn't fighting infiltration. Ground-level cabins tried to heat enclosed air, while cold air infiltrated through gaps. She was simply positioning herself in naturally rising, warm air. The heat was flowing upward regardless. She'd intercepted it rather than trying to contain it. Her fuel consumption was minimal. 4 pieces of wood burning continuously equaled roughly 1 piece per 6 hours. 4 pieces daily, maybe half a cord monthly. Ground-level cabins would burn 1 to 2 cords monthly, heating enclosed spaces against infiltration. The elevation provided advantages she hadn't fully anticipated. Morning fog, thick in Appalachian valleys during autumn, would settle at ground level overnight. She'd wake on her platform above the fog layer, looking down at white mist completely obscuring the ground, while her platform sat in clear air 15 feet above. The visual was surreal, like floating on a white ocean. Ground-level homes would be damp and cold from fog penetration. Her platform was dry and clear. The psychological challenges of elevated living were harder than physical ones. She lived in constant awareness of the 15-foot drop surrounding her on all sides. The railings prevented accidental falling, but didn't eliminate the psychological impact. At night, needing to relieve herself meant descending the ladder in darkness, attending to necessities at ground level, climbing back up. The descent and ascent were terrifying in darkness, rope ladder swaying, feet searching for rungs, fear of missing a step and falling. The isolation was profound. The platform was 3 miles from town, deep in forest, elevated above ground. No neighbors, no visitors. Her only companions were the sounds of forest, birds during day, owls and other nocturnal animals at night. She'd talk to herself, maintaining language skills and sanity, would have full conversations playing both roles. The practice was concerning but necessary. The loneliness created by being both physically isolated and socially rejected was crushing. She'd been rejected by her mother-in-law, the only family she had left, lived alone in a structure the community mocked, had no prospects for marriage. She was a widow at 20 with no property, no family connections, nothing to offer except herself. The future looked like endless isolation and eventual death alone. But she forced herself to focus on immediate survival rather than long-term despair. October brought colder nights, 30s and 20s at ground level. Her platform with fire below maintained mid-40s. She'd sleep fully clothed under her blanket, cold but not hypothermic. Her body would generate perhaps 300 BTU per hour from basal metabolism. In the small platform space with rising heat from below, that body heat contributed to maintaining livable temperature. The elevation provided other advantages. Morning fog, common in Appalachian valleys, would settle at ground level. She'd wake on her platform above the fog layer, looking down at white mist covering the ground while her platform sat in clear air. Ground-level homes would be damp and cold from fog. Her platform was dry. Rain behaved differently at elevation. Heavy rain would be worst at ground level where water pooled. Her platform was above the worst drainage. The bark roof shed most rain. What little came through the floor, gaps drained immediately through rather than creating puddles. Wind was partially blocked by the surrounding chestnut trees. The trees acted as windbreak, reducing wind speed at platform level by perhaps half. Ground level in open areas experienced full wind. Her platform was protected. November brought cold that tested the system more severely. Ground level temperatures dropped to 30 degrees at night. The platform, 15 feet elevated with fire below, maintained 45 to 50 degrees. She'd sleep wrapped in her blanket, uncomfortable but not hypothermic. The rising heat column prevented temperature from matching the ground-level cold. December brought the sustained cold that made survival genuinely challenging. Ground temperatures dropped to 20 degrees and stayed there for days. Her platform, with constant fire below, hovered around 40 to 45 degrees. Cold enough that her breath was visible, cold enough that her fingers and toes ached, but not cold enough to cause hypothermia with blanket and body heat. The Hartley household, Emma's former in-laws living in their ground-level log cabin, was struggling. Their cabin couldn't maintain 50 degrees, despite burning wood continuously. Margaret was cold constantly, complaining bitterly, consuming wood at rates that depleted supplies. Then December brought the blizzard that proved everything and forced Margaret to confront what she'd done to the young woman she'd rejected. The storm began December 23rd with warning signs that experienced mountain residents recognized immediately as potentially catastrophic. Temperature dropped from 20 degrees at dawn to 10 degrees by noon to 0 by evening. The drop was too sustained, too rapid. Barometric pressure was falling, creating headaches and joint aches in people sensitive to weather changes. Animals were behaving strangely, squirrels and birds agitated, seeking shelter earlier than normal. By midnight, December 23rd, the storm hit with full intensity, temperature -5 degrees, wind building from 20 to 30 to sustained 40 miles per hour, snow beginning to fall, not gentle flakes but dense snow driven horizontally by screaming wind. Visibility dropped to 0 by 2 a.m. The world became white chaos. Emma was on her platform when the storm arrived in full force. She'd prepared as best she could, brought extra deadwood up to the platform so she wouldn't have to descend during the worst conditions, stocked the ground-level fire circle with enough wood to maintain continuous burning for 2 days, wrapped herself in her blanket, and waited. The wind was terrifying at elevation. The platform was 15 feet above ground, exposed to wind that ground-level structures partially avoided. The wind would hit the platform in gusts that made the entire structure sway. The 4 chestnut trees were solid, but the platform lashed between them would move perhaps 6 inches side to side during strong gusts. The motion was sickening, like being on a ship in rough water. The sound was overwhelming. Wind roaring through the forest at sustained 40 miles per hour created continuous noise, like standing beside a waterfall. The chestnut trees would creak and groan as wind stressed them. The rope lashings holding the platform would vibrate with tension. Emma would lie on the platform floor, lowest position, safest from wind, listening to the structure protest around her, wondering if this would be the gust that tore everything apart. Snow accumulated on the platform floor through the gaps and the roof opening, couldn't be avoided with the open design. She'd brush it off periodically, but it kept accumulating. By dawn, December 24th, perhaps 3 inches of snow lay on portions of the platform. Her blanket was dusted with snow. Her breath was creating frost on any surface near her face. But the heating system continued functioning despite the storm. The fire below, protected from worst wind by the platform above and the surrounding trees, burned continuously. The rising heat column maintained the platform space at 40 to 45 degrees, despite -5 degrees ambient and 40-mile-per-hour wind. She was cold, deeply achingly cold, but not hypothermic. The system was working. The Hartley cabin, 3 miles distant, was failing catastrophically by afternoon December 23rd. Margaret and John's log cabin, considered proper substantial housing, couldn't withstand the combined assault of -5 temperature and sustained 40-mile-per-hour wind. Cold air was forced through every gap between logs, around the door, through the chimney when wind created back pressure. The fireplace burned continuously, consuming wood at incredible rates, but couldn't keep pace with heat loss. By midnight, December 23rd, their interior was 45 degrees, despite burning wood as fast as they could feed it. By dawn, December 24th, 38 degrees. They were burning wood at rates that would deplete their winter supply within days, and still losing ground to the cold. Margaret sat near the fireplace, wrapped in every blanket they owned, shivering, despite proximity to fire. Understanding that their cabin, the proper housing she'd considered superior to Emma's absurd tree platform, was failing, while Emma somehow survived in open structure 15 feet above ground. "We're going to die here," Margaret said quietly to John. "This cabin can't stay warm. We're burning wood faster than we can sustain. We'll run out in 3 days and then we'll freeze." John looked at the fireplace consuming wood with desperate efficiency and understood she was right. The mathematics were impossible. They were losing. "Emma's platform," John said slowly. "She said fire below, heat rises. She claimed it would work in winter. What if she was right? What if that structure is actually warmer than our cabin?" "She's in an open platform during a blizzard," Margaret said bitterly. "She's probably already dead." But Margaret couldn't shake the possibility that Emma had survived what they couldn't, that the young widow she'd rejected and mocked had built shelter superior to the cabin Margaret had considered unquestionably adequate. The possibility was humiliating, but also offered hope. If Emma's platform worked, maybe they could shelter there. John Hartley made desperate decision on the afternoon of December 24th, walked 3 miles through blizzard conditions to Emma's platform location, seeking the woman his wife had rejected. The journey was nearly fatal. 40-mile-per-hour wind, -5 degrees, 0 visibility. He navigated by memory and desperation, arriving frost-covered and hypothermic but alive. Emma heard his voice calling from ground level, muffled by wind but unmistakable. "Emma, please! Margaret is freezing. Our cabin is failing. Can we shelter here?" She could have refused, could have called down, "You rejected me. Solve your own problems." Could have let them face consequences of their cruelty. The revenge would be justified, but revenge would also mean becoming what they'd been to her. She called down through the wind, "Climb up! There's room!" John climbed the ladder with frozen hands that could barely grip the rungs. Each step was agony. Fingers too cold for fine motor control, feet numb, body shaking from hypothermia. He reached the platform and collapsed. The 45-degree space felt genuinely warm after hours in 38-degree cabin and -5 wind. "How is this warm?" John gasped through chattering teeth. "You're in open platform during blizzard. We're in enclosed cabin with fireplace burning continuously. How are you warmer than us?" Emma explained the system while wrapping him in portion of her blanket. Fire below, creating rising heat. Platform positioned in that heat column. Elevation above ground-level cold accumulation. Trees partially blocking wind. The design using natural convection rather than fighting infiltration. "Margaret needs to come," John said once he'd warmed enough to speak coherently. "She's hypothermic in the cabin. Temperature dropped to 38 degrees despite burning wood as fast as possible. She won't survive another night. Can you accept her here, after everything she did to you?" Emma faced the choice in its full complexity. Margaret had blamed her for Thomas's death, blame that was irrational but born of unbearable grief. Had treated her as servant for 4 years, had rejected her with minimal support, had mocked her platform as absurd construction, had claimed Emma needed male guidance because women couldn't understand basic physics. Emma could refuse Margaret entry, could say, "You made your choice. Die with it." The cruelty would be equivalent to what Margaret had shown her. Justice would be served. But Emma understood something Margaret didn't. Revenge feels satisfying in imagination, but actually just creates more suffering. Letting Margaret die wouldn't bring Thomas back, wouldn't heal Emma's rejection, would just add another death to the war's toll, would make Emma into someone Thomas wouldn't have recognized. "Yes," Emma said quietly. "Bring her. There's room. I'm better than she was to me. That has to be enough." John returned through the blizzard to the cabin, another nearly fatal journey. Helped Margaret walk the 3 miles to Emma's platform. Both arrived barely conscious from cold exposure, frost-covered, hypothermic to dangerous levels. Emma helped them up the ladder, supporting Margaret's weight from above while John pushed from below into the 45-degree platform space. 3 people crowded on the 120-square-foot platform for the remainder of the blizzard. The cramped conditions were intense. The platform was 12 feet by 10 feet. 3 adults meant roughly 40 square feet per person. They'd lie side by side, wrapped in Emma's single blanket, supplemented by John's coat. The intimacy was forced and awkward. Margaret had barely spoken during the journey and initial warming. Lay wrapped in the blanket, shivering as her core temperature gradually recovered. Emma tended the fire below, had to descend the ladder during blizzard to add wood, risking her own life to maintain heat that was saving all 3 of them. By evening, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Margaret had recovered enough to speak. Her first words were, "You saved me, after I rejected you, after I blamed you, after I called your platform absurd. You saved me." "Yes," Emma said simply. "Why? I would have let you die. Honestly, if our positions were reversed, I would have refused you entry, would have called it justice. Why are you better than me?" Emma considered the question. "Because Thomas taught me that survival isn't about making others suffer. It's about enduring what you must while remaining human. You rejected me. That hurt. But letting you die wouldn't heal that hurt. It would just make me into someone who lets people die. I don't want to be that person." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Finally, "I blamed you because blaming was easier than accepting that Thomas died and nobody was at fault. He went to war. War killed him. That's nobody's fault, but I couldn't accept that. Needed someone to blame. You were there. You survived when he didn't, so I blamed you. It was irrational. I know that now, but grief isn't rational." "I understand that now," Emma said. "I didn't when you rejected me. I was angry and hurt and felt betrayed, but 4 months living alone on this platform taught me that anger hurts me more than it hurts you. I can be angry at you, or I can survive. I chose survival, which meant forgiving you not for your sake, but for mine. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not. But forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to remain human. I forgive you because holding rage would destroy me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean pretending the rejection didn't happen, doesn't mean I'm coming back to live with you." The 3-day storm became forced intimacy that rebuilt relationship through shared survival. They talked during the long, cold hours, shared memories of Thomas, acknowledged the grief that had poisoned their relationship, began healing in ways that wouldn't have been possible without the crisis. When the blizzard ended December 26th, they descended to find the cabin barely habitable. Interior temperature 28 degrees, wood supplies critically depleted, the structure having failed to protect them. The elevated platform that everyone had mocked had been the warmest shelter in the region, saving 3 lives through intelligent design rather than expensive construction. Emma lived in the elevated platform for 3 more years. By age 23, she'd saved enough money from seasonal work to buy timber and build a proper cabin, but she built it with elevated floor design incorporating her platform principles. Married again at 25 to a man who appreciated her survival skills and intelligence. The original platform remained in place for decades. Other families adapted the elevated platform design for hunting shelters and emergency refuges. The concept of positioning living space in the rising heat column rather than on cold ground became accepted mountain wisdom. Emma died in 1928 at age 81. Her obituary mentioned her Civil War widowhood, but focused primarily on the elevated platform, the treehouse everyone mocked, that proved superior to conventional housing when winter tested everything. The platform site still exists, marked by the 4 ancient chestnut trees, now over 160 years old, that supported the structure. Modern thermal analysis confirms the heating principles. Fire at ground level, producing 200,000 BTU per hour, creating heat column rising at approximately 5 feet per second, platform positioned in that column, capturing perhaps 30,000 BTU per hour. Adequate heating for 120 square foot space with minimal fuel consumption. The story is about a young widow who understood that elevation matters, who built survival using principles her dead husband taught her, who proved that positioning yourself in natural heat flow is more efficient than fighting against cold, and who chose mercy over revenge when given the chance to let cruelty have consequences. Because sometimes the person living in trees knows more about thermal dynamics than people living in proper houses. The tree platform everyone mocked was actually intelligent engineering, and rising heat provides better heating than enclosed fireplaces when you understand convection.